The Unheard Workers by Nicholas Bellis. Have you ever wondered how many details have been left out of history? Consider this. Japanese helped build the transcontinental railroad. The contribution of the Chinese immigrants is well known, but this bit of forgotten history adds social and cultural complexity to the overall story. Idaho was the first state that opened railroad work for the Japanese in America. The first generation of Japanese immigrants, or Issei, would work on the Oregon Short Line and then would work on the Second Transcontinental Railroad, the Northern Pacific Railroad. The Japanese were eager to make a fortune in America and either return to their home country or to settle permanently in America. At the time, as part of the agreement of hosting Japanese workers to work on the railroad, the laborers would have to pay a fee or give a percentage of their own wages to labor agents. Labor agents would also find jobs, food, housing, and clothing as they worked on the railroad. The Oregon Short Line ran from Wyoming to Oregon, and Japanese laborers were ready to work. The introduction of the Japanese into local communities was difficult from the start. The local communities and white laborers used the same discriminatory remarks and biases the Chinese received while working on the railroad lines. The Japanese desired to learn from Americans and integrate with them as well. The Japanese would put on fireworks shows for the community during 4th of July events, and some community members even taught the laborers English. They had done this to create a connection between the Americans and these Japanese workers, trying to create a mutual respect for one another. While trying to assimilate with the community members, the laborers were not always treated respectfully, even from their own labor bosses. The labor bosses set up a scheme for workers to eat in certain restaurants or housing while railroads were under construction, but they would have to pay using their own wages. They would also force Japanese to wear certain clothes to distinguish themselves apart from the Chinese and avoid scrutiny or threats of being sent back to Japan. Men would wear Western-style shirts and pants and would often wear caps to disguise themselves and blend in with the local communities. They even had to adapt their appetites and convert their food into American styles. The bosses would ban anything that would be remotely similar to the Chinese. Many deaths occurred during the first years of working on the railroads, such as malnutrition, illnesses, and night blindness, causing men to be accidentally run over by trains. The Japanese working on railroads were hardly ever mentioned in the news until anti-Japanese sentiments started blaming them for labor shortages and even spreading diseases. When this occurred, Japanese were forced out of states to work out on California railway lines instead. The Japanese workers were paid low wages, and as time went on, many first-generation Issei brought their family members from Japan, and even some began to start their own families in America. After the completion of railway lines, many Japanese immigrants would become store owners, merchants, farmers, fishermen, miners, and teachers. They would begin to create their own communities within cities and establish themselves to stand out from other cultures and races such as the Chinese. Some would convert to Christianity and place their children in school to become educated. As the Japanese families started to settle in, anti-Japanese movements erupted. By 1900, San Francisco started an anti-Asian movement, which caused violent incidents to occur against the Japanese immigrants. James D. Phelan was the San Francisco mayor at the time, where he stated, "Chinese and Japanese are not the stuff of which American citizens can be made." The Japanese government halted passports in response, and even as a gesture of good faith, donated to help San Francisco recover from an earthquake. This didn't stop the racist movement, however. In 1906, the San Francisco School Board declared that all Japanese children would be forced to attend segregated schools. Mobs had also occurred which targeted Japanese-owned businesses during the San Francisco streetcar strike. The Japanese government was furious and threatened war unless this issue was resolved. President Theodore Roosevelt was sympathetic to California's concerns, but stood by the Japanese people. He wrote in his autobiography stating that California adopted the very foolish procedure of trying to provide by law that the Japanese children should not be allowed to attend the schools with the white children. An offensive and injurious language was used in connection with the proposal. He goes on to say that, "I would use every resource in the national government to protect the Japanese and their treaty rights. The nation and not the individual states must deal with the matters of international significance and must treat foreign nations with the entire courtesy and respect. Roosevelt told the school board that they must throw away this act, and Roosevelt and the Japanese government signed the Gentleman's Agreement, which would protect the Japanese citizens, and in return, Japan would limit immigration to the United States. Roosevelt respected the Japanese people and their government and wanted to stand by them. However, Roosevelt still regretted this decision of the Gentleman's Agreement, feeling it was wrong to limit people he held with such high regard. He states, "I have been reluctantly forced to the conclusion that it is indispensable for the Japanese to be kept from coming in any number as settlers to the United States. The Japanese people came to America just like any other immigrant, with one goal in mind, to live in a country with opportunities. The Japanese worked hard to get here, they worked hard to make a living, and worked hard trying to assimilate and get along with their fellow Americans. They did not deserve this treatment, but despite everything that they went through, they still held strong, providing for America and their families for generations to come. Their contributions will never be forgotten. It is our job to pay attention more to the details."